Welcome, everyone. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elena Sudakova. I'm a founder of GRAD. This event is organized in collaboration with Pushkin House, where I'm also a trustee. This is one of the first events in the Pushkin House live series, which promotes and supports new conversations with artists, curators, and other creatives. So watch this House of Pushkin House live. You'll find the Just Giving link in a chat we've just posted. And if you like this event, and if you are in a position to do so, please consider a small donation, which would allow Pushkin House to continue with its live program. Let me first begin by introducing our wonderful speakers here, while also sharing, Alisa will be sharing some images of their works.
Do now.
Right, so our first guest is artist Margarita Gluzberg.
Hi.
Margarita was born in Moscow, but has been living in London since 1979. Margarita is currently a reader in contemporary visual production, fine art at the Royal College of Art. She works in a variety of media, from large-scale drawings to photography, installations, and performance. And in her work, Margarita creates a visual territory from historical, autobiographical, literary references. And images of drawings you're seeing on your screen now were part of her recent solo exhibition in Paradise in Pushkin House in 2019. This is also an image of Margarita's Rock on Bones performance lecture at RCI in 2016. And this amazing image of crystal balls is part of a new series which Margarita is currently working on during the lockdown. Our next guest is Maria Kapajeva. Maria is an Estonian artist based in London. Trained as a photographer, Maria works with collage as well as found and archival images to re-examine personal stories, public memories, and issues of gender inequality through the history of Soviet post-colonialism. Maria is also actively involved in Fast Forward Women in Photography project. Images you're seeing now are from Maria's latest book, Dream is Wonderful Yet Unclear, which has been published a couple of weeks ago, and which is a culmination of her ongoing research project of a history of the community surrounding a textile mill in Narva, Estonia, where members of Masha family once worked and when Masha grew up. And our third guest on the panel is Sasha Galitzine, who is an independent curator based in London. Sasha is particularly interested in engaging with unusual places, not usually associated with arts. And images you're seeing now, Alisa, maybe. Yeah, are just some glimpses of the projects Sasha organized, such as Salon 63, which was a collaboration between artists and several hair and beauty spaces along the Bus 63 route. Over the last 6 months, Sasha has led a campaign to save Jerry's Pompeii, which is a total work of art created by self-proclaimed gardener and sculptor Jerry Dalton in his social housing flattened garden along the Grand Union Canal. During the lockdown, Sasha has been incredibly creative and she co-founded Quarantine Arts website to encourage imaginations and keep conversations open. Right, and so we can now, okay. So to frame this discussion, I would like to begin with the title of this event, Postponed Futures. There is a brief history to it, which dates back to 2017, to the eponymous show curated by Ukrainian artist Nikita Gadan at GRAD, which essentially was a contemporary artist's response to historical works of avant-garde in the context of military conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which was still ongoing in 2017. And I'll just give you a small quote from his artistic statement. If the artists of the historical avant-garde frequently turned to the planning of a new type of social interaction, if their oeuvre had a paradigm of reaching the future, then one of the defining qualities of contemporary art is the absence of a future, no futurism. Not to plan a better tomorrow, but to persevere through conflict, to stand with dignity in the face of history, to persist. But then, of course, this title is a bit of provocation, because life goes on, new projects and formats emerge, and we see this boom of online creativity, which takes many shapes and formats, and most importantly, artists continue to work. There is a lot of voiced concern about the future of cultural organizations, smaller organizations in particular, such as Pushkin House, which are independent and don't receive support from the government, who have found themselves overnight in a very difficult situation, as did many artists. But I think there is a lot of shared understanding among cultural professionals that in order for us to start to re-emerge from this crisis, we should really recognize, re-acknowledge and rethink the roles of those who drive social transformation and inspire these organizations and inspire all of us artists. So what is the role of art at the times of social change? What should art be addressing? I came upon Margarita's drawings on Instagram on these fragile crystal balls, which you've just seen a couple of weeks ago. And they rhymed in my head with the title from Masha's project, Dream is Wonderful, Yet Unclear, which, as I learned from Masha, is a quote from lyrics of March of Enthusiasm, written for a Soviet film, The Bright Way. And this particular line from the song was lately censored and changed due to the ambiguity of the word unclear. So Margarita, my first question is to you. We're all in a kind of a postponed mode. In a way, there is a lot of uncertainty about the future. Yet we're faced with this kind of impossibility of postponed thinking about the future, right? Will we find answers to the future in your crystal balls?
Well, yeah, maybe the crystal balls, but interestingly, we are in a postponed future. I just have to make one correction, which is I'm no longer at the Royal College. I'm at the Royal Academy now.
Right. Okay. So, sorry about that.
Just to say, so they don't sort of, the future has happened for me in a way. So anyway, I am now senior lecturer at the Royal Academy, but I was at the Royal College. But anyway, but to think about something more kind of about the future, and I had very sort of almost was wondering what to talk about and how to phrase this. And interestingly, I heard at the Royal Academy, one of our professors yesterday did a lecture, Federico Campagna, who's this amazing young Italian philosopher. His book, Technique and Magic, is really great. And he was talking about the fact that we're actually entering a kind of end arch of, I suppose you could call it, a kind of Western determined civilization. And how do we make work in this time? And he talks about something really, really interesting, which is the fact that we all exist in separate worlds to some degree. And I mean, it was an absolutely brilliant lecture, and I'm really going to defer to it a little bit. It came so kind of pertinently at the time. And he talks about the fact that civilization, and I'm going to quote from him, is actually synchronized through institutions like a metronome. And civilization is a kind of greatest type of institution in a way. And we live in a sort of westernized modernity that a lot of the world has chosen to adopt, which is really coming to a kind of end of its run. And even though we're maybe at a microcosm, I mean, I don't think Western civilization ends in a minute, but maybe this moment is a kind of indicator of something happening. And then he proposed another really amazing idea, which is that what civilizations refer back to when they're at an end is in a way, they refer back to the ruins of other civilizations. So what we're left with are ruins. And ruins are often made by artists and cultural workers and architects. And what we left is a kind of traumatic event of the ruin. And again, he was proposing, it's a really complex lecture, and his book is coming out. I'm almost plugging. His book, I think, is coming out in a few months, about the idea of prophetic cultures. He was proposing the idea that perhaps as cultural producers, what we need to do is produce good ruins that can be read in future times. And he talks about the idea of prophecies and mysticism and in a way also metaphysics, but also this idea that perhaps what we need to do are make readable ruins, or at least that's how I took this on, that perhaps what we need to be making are not new institutions, but sort of potential ruins that can be read. So I'm kind of interested in the crystal balls or the spheres as potential ruins, maybe. And this has just happened yesterday. I mean, I think that's the wonderful thing, that we are present in certain moments, and perhaps we seek out things that we need to hear. So I was amazed to be able to hear this thing, and perhaps I was maybe looking for somebody to talk about ideas that are pertinent now. But I really like this idea that we're perhaps working with the potential ruins of the future.
That's fascinating. That's really insightful. Again, the question is how these ruins will look like.
Well, how the ruins will look like. And one of the things he talked about is the fact that we have a flawed problems of ruins because of literally things like bad paper and digital archiving, which does not make a good ruin. The disintegrating nature of records. And sort of he talked about how to create new forms of records, that what is it that we leave? And in a way, I think we're going to need to read his book and this idea of prophetic cultures. And I think it's something very important because in a way, I think what we're dealing with right now is a question of time and how an artist presence in time. And I think Sasha Galitzine's project, the preservation of Pompeii, is this amazing example of this idea of the ruin that's being preserved, but it's already a reformulated ruin. So it's a kind of ruin that has been read from the past and reconfigured and then represented and then potentially preserved as a kind of ruin of a ruin. So I think that proposition of the ruin is something really incredible, because we're dealing with time and disintegration and in a way, this idea that that in a way cultural producers, they use civilization as a way of addressing each other. Because again, what Campagna was talking about, that we all need these modalities of thinking, because otherwise we exist in this kind of solipsistic time. But at the same time, our perception can only be merged together through, I suppose, through a kind of mutual institution. That's why we need civilization. That's perhaps why we need friends and discourses, and the discourses of art, which allow us to communicate on certain terms that we all understand. Otherwise, we do have a kind of Tower of Babel, the ultimate ruin.
Well, there is a lot to think about there. So that is actually very thought-provoking. I was listening to this talk. I think Masha also heard it a while ago. It was one of the first lockdown talks with Katie Chukhrov and Judith Butler on possibility of political absence beyond co-presence. And Katie was saying that our pre-lockdown life was so defined by surplus that it is only inevitable that this situation will kind of trigger a return to basic needs. The question is, you know, how we define those basic needs and what do they mean again. So I guess there are, you know, more questions at the moment, but that's exactly why we need spaces like this to have conversations. Thank you. Masha, now over to you. Despite these extraordinary times when many, you know, people are furloughed and inactive, your book has just been released in April this year. And it was, for me, it was a great example of collaborations, and one of the recurring responses that we're hearing now to how culture can re-emerge is through collaboration. So an artist who works in collaborative practice, do you feel collaborations is the future model for a post-COVID world?
Well, thank you, Elena. It's obviously a very big question and very complicated. I mean, the short answer will be obviously yes. And I think the current situation is really show it how, despite even we consistently engaging in the conversations like today in the Zoom, we're actually quite isolated in our issues and problems. Even more, we become more isolated dealing with this situation that the government, the system has very little support. At the moment, I'm just talking about artists, but it's much bigger actually than even the art world. And how most of the people even have no time to have this conversation, just kind of surviving on the level of it. And I think that's what, in terms of the culture and art, I kind of I hope that this current situation really shows that, in a way, culture is not luxury. It's not something, but it is something essential part of our life and everyone's life. And I think together with that, it shows obviously how it is unprotected. And especially I'm like, as an artist, can feel it immediately. And like, I mean, I'm not even talking about like my exhibitions were canceled, you know, some fee were not paid, because I understand some organizations who would not be able to pay, they're also in the survival level. But it's something also beyond that there is no system who protects. There's no, like, I mean, literally like salary for artists or recognition of all of that, or all this labor and art put into it. At the same time, there is a big appreciation of it at the moment and encouragement. What I found is really kind of fascinating to see that obviously organizations try immediately to restructure and think about what we can do, what we can offer for artists in terms of virtual spaces to work. But actually what I find as an artist, I wasn't, for example, interested in applying any of this potential fundings which supposed to help me. What I need, actually, I need just support. I just need like to buy food, pay my rent, and be able to sustain my practice, not trying to create something new immediately. Because actually majority of artists I found, they needed time to process this, to respond like in a way, like artistically. So saying all of that, I also think in speaking of kind of on a collaboration in terms of, I think it is very important, and I really like what Margarita says in terms of like we live in a separate worlds. It is, and it feels it's even more than ever like our bubbles we live in. So the way is, I would like to see how it would work. It's not about so much, I don't know, even it's not about the list of the exhibitions each artist is gonna have. It's something about the beyond that, how we can start to strengthen. Maybe that also resonates with what Margarita says about like kind of the ruins of old systems we have, strengthen them, but at the same time also create something new. And that for me, it would be actually quite interesting while I was listening Margarita, actually like a question to her in after we kind of talk a bit briefly. It's about like a ruins. It is a question to me because we are sitting now in a patriarchal system. So for me, I'm much more looking forward to see something more pro-feminist, something new initiatives, which will be supporting and being more inclusive for everyone. Then rather than kind of we try to strengthen what is already now there. And so for me, that's what I'm kind of looking and observing and seeing, but in a way, I mean, more in the practical sense, it's obviously affecting in a way. I'm sure, like everyone's agree who's here, like in any different ways, like creatives, how even like some very practical things, or even creating the new work. I don't know how, like for example, for Margarita, but for me, it's immediately kind of I start to think differently about it, because like we just talked with Elena before. I'm preparing now new work for the new exhibition, hopefully happen in September in Tallinn. And I'm already thinking, because for me, the experience of my work is very essential. So I have to kind of, I can't avoid this situation. So I have to even think about my work in terms of even like a distance and how it's experienced. Is it possible to have a group or not, individual? So for me, that in a way kind of exciting, but then it's also, I'm trying to think, is it compromising me or not, which is also interesting. It's another kind of subject I wanted to bring up. Maybe it will be interesting more to discuss. And I think I stop here, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted quickly to ask, there was a premiere of your video just recently released by Gallery of Photography Ireland. So your response, your exhibition there was cancelled, so you responded by bringing the work online.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a kind of, it was proposition of the gallery and agreement because my exhibition and partially they supported also publication was through the European program, A Woman's Work. And so they decided kind of not to postpone it, but make it kind of as much as possible visible online, even though I was strongly kind of insisting not call it online exhibition, because that my body of work, you really need to be present and experience it in a space. But at the same time, luckily, because the production of books started just before lockdown, and thanks to Latvian printers who decided not to close and finish the book. So we kind of try to focus on the book. And what is also interesting as a kind of a cultural product or art product, it becomes to be very popular. People actually really appreciated getting it in the post because you can touch it, you can feel it. It's something that what we are actually missing quite a lot nowadays is like some physicality.
Yeah,
so I'm quite happy that the all responses people get to me, even if it's all through kind of online, but actually they get something quite physical.
Yeah. Yes, I was present at this presentation of the book, and somebody from the audience responded that they were looking forward to the smell of it.
Yeah.
But actually, I must say that was one of the best Zoom events I've been to. It was, it was the sense of kind of intimacy and partnership along all the participants was amazing. So that was very touching.
Yeah, wonderful.
So well done, and congratulations on that. Okay, Sasha, now over to you. You've been incredibly productive during this lockdown, which I find extremely inspiring. So you just launched your website, Quarantine Arts. You organized live drawing sessions. You started volunteering with NHS, I think. So what enabled you to be so inspiring for many of us?
I'm just not very good at being alone, so I'm just trying. I need every outlet possible to kind of reconnect with people, which is what I normally do in the art. Actually, I just thought it was. I'm glad that you made the link, Margarita, with the ruins, because when you were saying it, I was like, oh my god, this is so Jerry. So just to briefly explain what Jerry's Pompeii is, for those of you that don't know. I knew this man called Jerry, who was a very silent, private man, and he died late August, and he'd already shown me before he died, through another friend of ours, his neighbour Rock, his incredible flat, which was in social housing, and he'd spent the last 30 years of his life since early retirement making this like amazing magical kingdom, made with sort of miniature Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey over his bed. Absolutely everything was transformed, and like hundreds of sculptures outside, all along the canal, this amazing garden, and it was basically secret. But the Pompeii idea came from a quote directly from Jerry when he said, "They'll be astounded what they'll find in my garden in years to come. It will be like Pompeii or something, Jerry's Pompeii." And during this time, we've been organising, like me and the rest of the campaign have been organising a few kind of focus groups around like trying to work out how we can possibly fundraise to save the museum, to save what we want to be a kind of local museum, keeping everything in situ as Jerry had it, and almost it as a kind of centre point for inspiring makers in the area and more widely. And we were kind of talking exactly about this ruin idea, and Dan Hicks from the Pit Rivers has actually written a really great article that I'll post on the chat on ArtNet, which is all about how he thinks that, well, we were talking initially about how traditionally how we preserve things is kind of governed by how wealthy the individual was that left something behind. So National Trust, for example, who we're kind of talking to about Jerry's, most of their properties come with a huge endowment and therefore allow them to be preserved, whereas Jerry was an ordinary man, and his work speaks of kind of marginalized experiences, and all of this COVID thinking has kind of hopefully is forming a shift in the art world in general, where we will hopefully be more at this kind of shift to a new kind of humanism, which is what Dan Hicks talks about, and the idea that huge museums, like the gatekeepers of culture, that now won't exist in the same way as it has, and hopefully there'll be a shift towards the local and the personal narratives. And someone like Jerry's is a kind of perfect example of allowing a kind of seemingly ordinary man's imagination to kind of to transform other people's lives and kind of realize possibilities of their own wanderings. And in the same way, like, this COVID situation hopefully will make us invest more in our local and invest more time in our community and travel less. And the other interesting thing about Jerry's, which I think links very well to this situation, is that he didn't travel, but his work, you go everywhere. You kind of go to the country, all around the UK, all around Napoleonic Europe, and hopefully this time will allow us creatively to think about traveling beyond our flats, but in our imaginations, not necessarily in a kind of, what's the word, physically. Yeah. So that was Jerry's. How that, and then I liked what you said, Maria, about the inclusivity, because that's another thing that I'm particularly interested in. And for example, with Quarantine Arts, this life drawing that I've been running, a lot of the people, in fact, most of the people that have joined the class, they don't normally make time for drawing. And they've kind of come together, and it's just so fun, and they all like really look forward to it, and they've kind of just taken on this new kind of belief in their own creativity. And I think hopefully another thing that this time will do is kind of empower people to create and not be judged. Like kind of think about what creative practices they have in their own life that might not be necessarily visual arts, it might not be professionalized practice, which is obviously you must still be separated to an extent, but you know, all sorts of different things. From my friend started for Quarantine Art, started recording foraging sound clips of her in isolation in Scotland talking about the plants or recipes, or hopefully there'll be like a new kind of community formed where people feel allowed to create. And this is what the Arts Council is trying to promote anyway, everyone being creative. I think this is, they got there just before this COVID lockdown. So
yeah, they're trying at the moment. I think they're really concerned with providing this help and support with artists, and I think all the funds have really been relocated to these emergency funds from all the other projects. But do you think that this kind of because we see so much kind of happening online, so again, this Katie Chukrov addressed this as global panopticon of online streaming. Do you think in a way we're kind of refusing to grieve a loss of contact, you know, a loss of interaction?
Yeah, I think that nothing's going to be able to replace physical contact. And the thing about the visual arts is that it's so important to see something in the flesh, you know, which is what we've been spoiled, being able to travel so easily before this. And I mean, I've been trying to think of how we could do virtual tours of Jerry's online, but it's just not going to be remotely the same. It's about being completely engulfed by what someone has created, like museum shows. But there hopefully will be a kind of new intimacy in that, you know, if we go back to seeing museums, and we're lucky with the visual arts, you know, much more than theatre, which is going to be seriously damaged by this. But hopefully if we go into museums and have to just be a bit more patient, then we'll be able to experience art even in a more productive way than kind of a crowded private view or a blockbuster exhibition. So I don't know, maybe there'll be new ways of engaging in more meaningful ways, which is also what I'm interested in.
No, thank you. So that kind of you know, brings me to my next question. So as you were saying, it's a very different experience when you are looking at the, you know, on the screen, and it's very difficult to readapt. Is there a way to translate, you know, artist work into the screen? And that's the question for all of you. How can art be experienced without physical gathering? Or to rephrase, kind of, is there a way to provide a feeling of shared presence between artists and audiences in these circumstances? Margarita, you go first. Yeah.
Oh,
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
There we go. Well, I think that, I mean, first of all, I think that I want to kind of address this in a slightly different way, which is, I really feel, and maybe that's because I'm kind of enjoying the slightly utopian kind of thinking right now. The separation allows you to think more abstractly, which I think has been quite kind of useful, even though there are lots and lots of difficulties with this, and I have them on a personal level, but you know, actually you still can think more abstractly if you're slightly removed. But I think that I would say that what we still have to question is kind of, are we holding on to old notions of what experience is? And so this idea that we must all experience art in the same way, and therefore how do we translate something immediately onto the screen? I think that maybe the question would be a much bigger question of what is experience, what is experiencing art? I mean, obviously there are immediate solutions. You can post pictures online and people will see them, right? There are immediate solutions. people need to eat, people need to earn money. These are kind of immediate critical things that need to be addressed. We can't survive without them. But then on a further, more abstract level, you know, how do we rethink the institution perhaps? How do we think the art fair, that all these things that are, you know, maybe in Campagna's words, this kind of end of an arch, and they are kind of unsustainable, this westernized kind of, I suppose, global operations are obviously problematic. And then I suppose we are entering into, again, I think there are lots of contradictions here anyway. I'm not responding directly maybe to your question, but also referring back to what people said, which is that, you know, do we want to hold onto these institutions that are kind of deeply problematic? And what we don't want to do is actually sit among the ruins, kind of, you know, it's a bit like the Titanic is sinking and the musicians are playing along their string quartet, and that's beautiful and touching, but in the end they are going to sink with their beauty of old civilization, like this idea of this dignity that we preserve and we hold on, and we don't want to sink. And you know, we don't want things to stop. We just want to have glasses of wine on Zoom. You know, we want to pretend we're having dinner parties on Zoom. Just have a break. Have a break. And so I suppose it's this kind of how do we sustain meaningful experience, whether it's art or wider things, you know, when there are obviously problems. And I think what Sasha said is really interesting, this idea that we don't travel so much, but we travel maybe in our heads, but you know, I am completely with that, but at the same time it can be seen as quite a reactionary thing as well, and I'm conflicted on it, which is that, like, because rich people will still travel but poor people will not at all. So then there's this economic problem of who are the gatekeepers of experience, you know, down to the point that not everyone has 10 laptops in their house. And, you know, there are so many limitations in how we distribute these things. I mean, I suppose I'm answering with lots and lots of questions, because I feel that whenever I think, yes, it's great. I love the fact that there are butterflies and lovely air in London. And at the same time, it's amazing. At the same time, I know that it could seem incredibly totalitarian to say, great, no one go anywhere, apart from the people with private jets who will still go somewhere, you know, because they will be able to go somewhere. So I find myself very conflicted in, you know, in some ways saying, let's post lots of things online, and at the same time thinking, but why? Let's reimagine something. You know, let's not keep posting paintings on, you know, and then go have a look at them and let's have a crit. I think there are so many questions about how artists should operate, you know, rather than actually saying, okay, great, let's just try and mimic exactly the same thing, but with all the limitations, and not rethink the kind of the fabric, the absolute problematics of how we operate. So I'm just asking questions, actually.
Well, I think these institutions should really invite, you know, artists to hear their thoughts on this, because this is really important. Because at the moment we're seeing that, you know, there are these plans put in place, how they will open up with this physical distancing. So without really processing, you know, okay, there is this kind of it's not comfortable. There's this inconvenience, but. Yeah. And they're kind of going on like the old machine. Yes. Anyway, Masha, would you like to respond?
I actually want to add to it that maybe what you were saying made me to think it is exactly, I found the biggest frustration I was with cancellation of my exhibition, that I wasn't involved in that decision making. I was just got a call and just been informed. And that's what I found, this kind of frustration. If you working with me in a partnership, why I'm not part of it. But anyway, so I mean, it's a different situation, but I actually wanted added probably even more questions to what Margarita is saying, more adding and referring a bit what Sasha was talking about, the local. What is also interesting experience, I go from my personal experience, but I'm sure it's a lot of people, you start to question what is your local, what is the local for you, and what is fine. Like we are sitting in London, and I am like, so I'm in a way like immigrant here, right? So I came here to this country, so and this is not my home, and here is suddenly, and it's especially like in the London or other big cities, the reality is like we're sharing with a lot of, you know, like people, different kind of, some of this like a family, some of them not. And suddenly this whole situation is like, for example, for me, putting a really big question: am I in the right place? Am I with the right people? What I'm doing? And do I want to actually spend, even if we talk about really like a few months, or talking about exactly what Sasha was mentioned, actually investing your time, sources, everything in a something. So for me, it becomes to be quite individual choice. Where is this local, where I would like to invest and contribute and open up conversation and building up something. And somehow I share it with a few of my friends who in the London, who are comers in the London, who are not local. They kind of feel at the moment that London is absolutely wrong place to be. And it's very interesting, because when you don't have what London in a way offers you, exactly that network, the culture, everything, you suddenly feel like, what I'm doing here, I just want to be somewhere else. And it's very interesting, the process. And I think it's very important questions, which anyway Sasha was kind of raising about this locality and investing in that. But it's also of course it comes to a privilege about thinking even about do I actually have a privilege to choose my local community, or I don't have a choice, which is, I think, also is important part of it.
Yeah, I've chosen my new community, which is Jerry's, because my Jerry's Road, because my road, I think everyone's gone to their third islands or something. So last week I cycled to Jerry's Road because one of the neighbours had their birthday. Most of them don't have a lot of them don't have internet, and a lot of them are vulnerable. And so they've been trying to think of new ways that they can still engage, because they don't have internet and they can't leave their houses. And one hilarious legend called John has got a new initiative called Hormead Road Bingo, where he dresses up and cycles up and down the road, shouting out bingo numbers, having given all the neighbours cards. And we were all there in everyone's different front gardens, and it's like this new, what I was saying earlier, kind of like new intimacy. So instead of, you know, being nosy and wanting to kind of, because this woman that I'm talking to now that is lonely, she says that she's fed up with the fact that there's no one around her area that cares about her. And if they do, it's because they want to know, they're nosy and they want to go into her house and see what she's got and see how much money she's got. She's not interested in that. So this is like a new way where people can go outside, not necessarily share their private life, but be together on the road, sharing this experience. And it was just the best night ever since lockdown. I loved it. And then this other artist project I thought was a really good way of doing something in lockdown, but that's not virtual. It's called Louise Ashcroft, and she's developed this initiative called Museum on Your Road, where she encourages people to kind of find an object, clearly like not particularly precious, but precious to them, or that they build a narrative that is precious, and then they put it outside their house or maybe in the window with a label, and then you can go down, if you're allowed to leave your house, you can go down the road and kind of read about people's objects. And I just thought that was great, and that's bringing back to the local, investing in your local. And I think everyone down Jerry's Road has certainly been supporting one another and finding new ways of being together. And if every road did that in London, then it would be less scary. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think this question of local and communal is very important. It's actually, you know, in everybody's minds at the moment. Well, thank you for your answers. So if you could briefly answer my two questions before we open the floor to the audience, and they're borrowed from Bruno Latour's new initiative. What sort of experience, activity you would not like to be taken into the future? What is it that you would like to be behind? And the next question, the kind of, you know, what activities you would like to see further developed or maybe started from scratch? Margarita, you go first.
Unmute. I need a moment. Can someone else go first?
I'm also, my brains are frozen. It's
Yeah.
questions. It's like suddenly I have to choose what.
Well, for me, yeah, go on.
Let me just formulate it. I think
let me just Sasha.
Sasha?
Well,
I just think that we can't. It's similar to what I just said. Thinking of, I don't want everything to go online because it's exhausting and it kind of ruins any kind of form of spontaneous engagement because you have to kind of structure it. But I mean, it's good in that it kind of gives everyone a voice, maybe equally, but it's also, you know, the people that don't have internet, there needs to be new ways that we can devise that you can still, you know, doorstop people from a safe distance. Or so that's the thing that I wouldn't want, just everything to go online. My answer.
I don't want people. I want people to. What's happened? Actually, I've just realised. I'm just going to say one thing. Since Zoom, the one thing that I think has been good is everyone's on time, because people stop cancelling events. It's really weird. People turn up on time, and whereas before everyone is continuously rearranging. No one's rearranging Zoom meetings, whereas people used to rearrange every single meeting, you know, endless rearrangements, and now they don't. It's really odd. So I'd like to take like non-rearrangement of meeting people. And I'd like to, you know, it used to be when there was a telephone, you just said, I'll meet you on a corner at 2:00, and you had no choice. You had to meet them, or you were really rude because you wouldn't turn up when you only had a landline. So I'd like to kind of not to have to rearrange meetings, because actually it's got better. People turn up on time.
Yeah, we save a lot of time now. That's true. Yes. Yeah. Masha, your turn.
No, I think my brains are frozen. Let's maybe have questions.
Let's look at the questions from the audience, if there are any. And
no, I don't think there were questions. There were some questions about the Federica Campani you were referring to, but someone already answered it.
I think it was a comment, maybe.
Yeah, and there was a comment from David saying, I think one of the West's problem is the appropriation of the terms civilization and modernism. So the arts should be involved in addressing global neoliberalism and a neoliberal global art form, and breaking from the idea of the center. We have that comment if anyone feels like responding. Otherwise, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand, or like do the press the reactions button, and I'll be able to unmute you.
Okay, well, no questions. That's good. Could we just post that link?
Wait, there is one from Clement. Yeah. I think we should hear you.
I have a question. So I didn't know how to do the hand thing. So I used an actual real hand.
I really unmute yourself.
I wanted to ask, well, starting with Margarita, but maybe all three of you, and thank you. This has been really excellent, and thanks, Elena, for organising it. Really stimulating. Is there a place for beauty anymore? I feel like it's a very old-fashioned question, because we are at this sort of crossroads at the moment, and I feel like I'm asking that from the other side, the kind of previous time. But I find at the moment I want beauty. I want tactile beauty. Maybe it's escapism, but it gives me so much nourishment. And you said something about sort of being on the deck of the Titanic and the dignity in that, and there being a place for that. But do we all have to be part of this? Do we have to all be engaging with the social narrative? Is there a place for kind of contemplative creation and contemplative enjoyment or engagement?
Well, I mean, this sounds weird, and I have had, I have a really, not to go into it, quite a complicated family situation right now. And so I haven't had time to work that much, but actually I've worked really a lot. And weirdly, I've had more like calm during the week of lockdown, even though I had a lot to do practically. But it's been very, very weird in that I've spoken to a few other artists who've said they've really liked this. There was a certain pause that was really, really amazing. If you were lucky enough to not kind of be totally like overwhelmed, for example, financially for just 2 weeks, even though everyone was to some extent. But I think, even though there were lots of complications, it's really strange. There's something about an isolated moment. And again, lots of people have confirmed it with me, including my students who I was really worried about, just saying mentally, it was kind of really amazing and quite like, I can use the term beautiful, perhaps, time, which somehow wasn't running alongside, it's like existing out of time. And actually, it reminded me of a time kind of before somehow, when time just happened. It didn't seem to be delineated through, I suppose, a new technology. And I do think it's something to do with technology. And I'm not a Luddite, I use a lot of technology, but I think it does affect our perception of time. And then that moment of contemplation, or just the kind of the space you have in your head, like a physical perception of space, is really altered by this constant, I suppose, compartmentalization of technological like rhythms that suddenly stopped for a bit. That's kind of, so therefore beauty was allowed to creep in a bit more.
You do you want to go, Marie?
Thanks. I just wanted kind of to add, actually, that's also, I thought of, Elena, your question, I would like to keep it, and referring to what Margarita says now, it's actually about the timing, productive timing of work. What I found is very interesting experience because of that, this very different rhythm we lives to have now, and the kind of regime is quite slightly different. But I find it, and also actually a few of my friends who I had conversation, they found actually how many hours a day they are literally productive, like sitting and writing. And for example, like 3 hours and that's it. But we all live in this system of the 6-8 hours of work, or even never ending 24/7. And that would be kind of really wonderful. That's what I mean, answering your Elena question, is like to bring that back, actually more considering that effectiveness of the labor and working. Do we really need to stick to that 8 to 5 and a kind of expectations that you work, or will be actually much more flexible in that sense? And it's also like, that's what, in a way, and I was thinking like what Clement kind of was asking about the beauty is in a way exactly like keep talking about this like locality and something, because of this different rhythm. What is also, maybe we can start to find the beauty in something which were passing by, never have a time to stop. I know now my area, like buildings, they're so beautiful. There are so many small beautiful objects like in the gardens, and I would never notice them without kind of walking around now as a one-day action. So that's what I mean, is like suddenly there's kind of different beauty start to appear, and something appreciation of something else which you would not notice when you're in that kind of busy schedule and life. At least like in London, that's how it feels all the time.
Yes, I think we can all relate to that. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so I was about Clem's question. I think because you have the internet in the daytime, then I'm really bad at exercising, but I really now relish like walking around the park and cooking. I think it's because of lack of human contact. You kind of, I've been obsessed with creating like really delicious meals for myself, and buying local ingredients because I'm saving so much from not going to restaurants and drinking endless coffees. So you really start to appreciate, you know, making. I think it's the way I can meditate, because I'm not very good at sitting still. So I think cooking has become my meditation, and walking. So that I would like to continue that. And also I forgot the other thing that I think is good about this is that we can kind of gather global voices together in a way that we never bothered to do before. Like for example, in the life drawing, we've got my friend Zander, who's an amazing ballet dancer from the Mariinsky Theatre, and he's just like stuck in his room with his radiator, not being able to perform on stage. And so we've got this like weird, intimate moment with someone that we would only be kind of hundreds of rows back from normally. And kind of, I've also been doing this like show and tell thing, bringing together friends from around the world to kind of talk about objects, because everyone has like interesting objects to talk about and share. And that kind of way of meeting global friends, I think, is a nice thing to continue when we come back a bit to normality.
Well, thank you all so much. Well, I think what this discussion revealed is that there are much more questions than answers. But let's kind of have more of these conversations. They're really needed. And hopefully they will in some way, you know, in a minimal way, shape some kind of a future. But Alisa, could you please unmute everyone, because I think I really want everyone to give a huge round of applause to our wonderful participants. Thank you so much.